Alright, let's see if we can do this without draining my entire battery and with remembering every single book I need to talk about, unlike last month. Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my March 2021 wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. During March I was hosting and participating in Sequelathon as well as the first Queerlit weekend of the year. I'm going to start with the nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. In March I read 17 books for a total of 5,067 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 2,563 of those pages were actually about 65 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 14 adult books, 2 middle grade books, and 1 YA book, which is super weird for me because usually it's about half and half between YA and adult with a middle grade thrown in, so I don't know how that happened, but I liked it. I read 14 novels, 1 anthology, 1 novella, and 1 graphic novel. This month, the biggest chunk of what I read was mystery thriller, nonfiction, and contemporary, as well as fantasy, historical fiction, and horror. If you adjust by page count, it doesn't change all that much. More than half of these books were from the library, but I did read some books I purchased on Kindle, from Life's Library, NetGalley, and one I got from an author giveaway. I read 8 audiobooks, 4 ebooks, 3 paperbacks, and 2 hardcovers. About half of my books were in my usual 300 to 399 pages range, and most books were from the last decade or so, with a couple of older books thrown in as well. The majority of these books were by male authors, although I had 3 items by the same male author, so that probably tipped me over into the majority, but the gender of the protagonist was much more varied. In the case of not applicable, those take into account non-fiction books where there wasn't a central protagonist. In terms of setting, I had reads from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and other worlds. In terms of diversity, nearly a third of what I read was intersectional, and less than a quarter didn't have any discernible diversity. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 2 3-star books, 4 3.5-star books, 6 4-star books, 1 4.5-star book, and 4 5-star books. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? Starting with my 3-star reads, the first one being The Bassrock by Evie Wyld. This is one of those books where you hear somebody talk about it and then they mention that it takes place in Scotland, and then that's why I automatically put it on my TBR. This one has 3 point of views, although one of them isn't used very often, and I don't really understand how it worked its way into the narrative. Therefore, I'm just going to focus on Vivian, who is a current day point of view, and Ruth, who is a point of view from the late 40s, early 50s. Ruth has just moved to this house in Scotland with her new husband and his children, although they are often away at boarding school, and it's about her life in this house and what kind of happens around the area. Flash forward to the current day, and Vivian is being paid to stay in this house because it is going to be sold off hopefully soon, but not super soon, so they still kind of need a house sitter. Although the writing in this book was absolutely beautiful, I didn't find myself really caring about what was happening. Obviously, there are some things that happen in this that are content warnings, such as child abuse is talked about off the page, as well as domestic abuse and allusions to losing loved ones. However, outside of just trying to construct the family tree of how these people were interconnected, I wasn't that interested in it. My other 3-star read was Witches Abroad by Terry Pratchett. This is the 3rd in the Witches series, as well as the 12th in the Discworld series as a whole. I, however, have only ever read witches books at this point. This one is a little bit of a strange case because 3 of the witches end up going on a road trip of sorts. They spend a lot of time abroad, as the title indicates, so it's mostly them complaining about being in foreign places and doing the kind of things that white people do when they go to foreign places where they speak different languages than you do, and you just basically speak louder at people, or you really mangle their languages, or you think that all of their food is weird when you're the type of person who eats snails back home. I was just trying to think of a thing they could eat that other people might find weird. There's also a fairy tale aspect to this one because one of them becomes a fairy godmother right at the beginning, and she's tasked with going to this different kingdom to make sure that this girl named Ella doesn't marry the prince. Which really is what Ella wants. She doesn't want to marry this prince, but there's another fairy godmother that wants her to marry the prince and has been shaping the kingdom so that that will happen. This had the usual amusing Terry Pratchett isms. One of the weird things about this book is there were no chapter breaks whatsoever, and it wasn't my favorite that I've read, although I overall enjoyed my experience with it. On to my 3.5 star reads, the first one being Weather by Jenny Offill. This is one of the climate fictions that I read this month, and this one is about this woman who has a husband and a son, and she started working for this old mentor of hers, and that person travels around the country talking about climate issues and needs somebody to answer her emails, and so this falls to our protagonist. A lot of the discussions in this book end up being whether or not people will have to move because of climate change, and what her son is going to do, and if she can even move him to an appropriate place, because how are we going to know how things are going to change over time? And basically it's just here to give you a lot of existential dread and anxiety, and it's very good at that. It is only about a 4-hour audiobook, so this one is fairly short. I recommend it, although go into it knowing that you are going to want to brush up on your survivalist techniques. As part of my book recommendations for Theater Lovers collaboration, I was recommended How I Paid for College by Marc Acito. This is set in the 1980s, and it centers a boy who all he wants to do is to go to Juilliard. His best friend has already been accepted, but he's a year behind, so he's looking forward to the audition and all that type of thing, but his dad doesn't want to pay for it. What follows is a huge series of shenanigans, not only trying to get him to go to Juilliard in the first place, but then also pay for it. Overall, this was very humorous. It is definitely an adult novel because they get up to a lot of very adult things in this book. And not only because it was set in the 80s, but it was published in the early 2000s, there's a bunch of homophobia in there, so just know that going in. Throughout this book, our protagonist gets more and more comfortable with his queer identity, and other people question their identities as well. The next 3 books are the rest of my 3.5 star reads, as well as my first 4-star read, and I'm just going to talk about them all together because they are in a series. First we have Killing Jack by Wyld Harper, and this is a novella that you can only get if you sign up for Will Harker's newsletter. I did that not only because I've had interactions with this writer online, and he seems like a pretty cool dude, but because I also wanted just to read this prequel novella that has nothing to do with the main story as a whole. This is set in 1888. The protagonist of this very short novella is an ancestor of the protagonist in the main series that this is part of. It is very short, so I'm not going to give it away for you, but it does have to do with murders. Let's just leave it at that. The first book in this series is Killing Jericho. This is about a man who used to be a police officer until he beat up a suspect because that suspect basically is a Nazi skinhead and killed a bunch of children for no good reason. He lost his cool, he shouldn't have done that. He ended up losing his job as well as going to prison for a couple of years. However, before being a cop, he actually worked for a mob boss, and before working for a mob boss, he grew up in a traveling carnival. Now that he's out of jail, he's back living at the same carnival, but things are not going well for him. He is self-medicating with booze and drugs, and he has this guy who he used to work with on the force who's trying to get him out of this funk, but nothing seems to work. One day, a case that has to do with his family history is dropped into his lap, and he can't not go down this route. The interesting thing about this series is Scott Jericho has these powers of detection because of his upbringing in a traveling circus. As a showman, you are kind of taught to notice people and kind of figure out where they've been, what they're going to do, if they're going to cause any trouble, all of those types of things. So he's very perceptive, and he used that a lot when he was a detective. That means obviously he's going to use it to figure out this series of murders that have something to do with his family history. Another thing I'd like to point out about this series is it is own voices not only for the queer rep, but for the traveler rep, because the author of this book also grew up with a father who was a showman. There was one thing in this book that kind of bothered me, which was a throwaway discussion near the beginning about how carnivals weren't as bad as people seem to think they were, and people are actually treated really great, and that's fine if in the case of this carnival that is the truth, but carnivals as a whole have a really bad history of treating people, especially with bodily differences, terribly, so just keep that in mind. Also, this is an incredibly bloody, gory series, so know that going into it. The second book in this series is my first 4-star read, and that's Silencing the Dead, again by Wyld Harker. This one picks up where the last one left off. There are some things left kind of unsolved at the end of the last one, so those interactions carry into this book, which I really much appreciated, but in this book he has a completely different case. I keep saying case even though he's not a detective anymore, but he is working with the police on this one because they see the value of having somebody from the inside of this carnival giving them information. This one has to do with a series of murders that center around people who are psychics, and it also has to do with this doctor that is trying to completely disprove that people have psychic abilities. We get the same kind of mystery vibe, the same background of this carnival setting. We also have some things going on in his personal life, because that was definitely something from the first book that was brought into the second book. I'm just low-key angry that I have to wait for the next one because this book only came out this month. Next I read How to Write an Autobiographical Novel by Alexander Chee. This is a series of essays that I actually picked up from the Life's Library book club. I knew nothing about this writer or what kind of essays would be into this going into it. I just went into it as it was, and there was quite a variety of different topics. We start off with this school trip where the author went from Maine to Mexico in his teenage years, and kind of all of the things that happened not only in Mexico but also thinking about learning a new language and how he kind of looked like he fit in there when he knew the language and got a little bit more tan, and how that's not really his experience living in Maine because he is mixed race. There are also a few essays about being queer and activism around that, as well as an essay about growing roses in his back garden. There was a lot in this book. I enjoyed it. Next we have Sexuality, a graphic guide, and this is exactly what it sounds like. It's a graphic novel that talks about the subject of sexuality. The great thing about this is it goes very into depth on different subjects to do with sexuality and backs it up with all this research from these other people. So if you were so inclined, if there was a specific subject that you were interested in, there's references right on the page of where else you can get information. This book didn't feel judgmental, it didn't yuck anyone's yum, it did bring up that some people look down on other people for thrill-seeking or these different weird type of activities, but the book itself didn't look down on people for what they want. This is the second graphic novel I've read by this author and illustrator duo, and I would read anything they collaborate on. Next I read The Backstagers and the Ghostlight, which is the first middle grade tie-in novel to the graphic novel series. In this book, the production crew is just finishing a run of the show Lease, and the ghostlight goes out while they are having a cast party on the stage. Sasha is meant to go change it, but then gets waylaid, doesn't change it till the next day, and this lets in kind of a spirit element to the theater. There are some unusual casting changes in the next production, which brings out this whole new adventure element to trying to figure out what is going on in the theater. This is just cute and fun times, and I honestly actually just picked up the second book from the library today. Next we have The Life and Medieval Times of Kit Sweetly. This is about this girl that has been working at this place called The Castle for the last 3 years as a serving wench. However, she has always wanted to train as a knight, not only because being a knight is badass, but because it comes with a pay raise and she needs that pay raise to pay for college. However, the sexist management at the castle will not let her train as a knight. Her older brother is a knight, but he shows up one day not fit to ride, so she takes his place, and at the end of that tournament she whips off her helmet and lets everybody know that she's a girl, and she starts a huge campaign to try to make sure that not just cis men are allowed to be knights. This book is feminist and fantastic, and it's not one of those feminist reads where it's like girls can do everything that boys can do. It's everybody can do things that boys can do. There are other people that work at the castle that are trans. There's also a non-binary character, which yes, falls under the trans umbrella. And these people also want to become knights because again, not only is it badass, but it pays way better. They band together to do some knight training so they can prove to the management of the castle that they should be allowed to at least try out. Kit also has this best friend who works there as a court jester, and he just seems like such a dreamboat. He rides a motorcycle, he's the videographer of the area, and they've told each other that they're not allowed to date because they don't want to wreck their friendship, but also she has feelings, so that's a whole other part of this book. Finally, for my 4-star reads, I also have The Dry by Jane Harper. This is another climate fiction book, but this one is a mystery thriller that's set in a small town in Australia. Our main character hasn't been back to this small town since he left as a teenager, and he's only going back for the funeral of his childhood best friend. The reason he left in the first place is one of their friends actually died when they were teenagers, and fingers started getting pointed at him, and he was basically run out of town. Now he works for the police in a big city, but he's not a cop, he's a financial analyst. However, there are some doubts as to how his childhood best friend and that childhood best friend's family died, and he's asked to stay on by the family to look over their financial records to see if he can bring any clarity to this case whatsoever. I really like this because not only were we trying to solve the present day case, we're also wondering about what happened in the past. We also looked at the climate implications of this small farming town and what it's done to them, because there is a drought on. They can't grow things, they can't sell things, they are not thriving. I thought this was great, and apparently it's the first in a series, so I might have to pick up the next one. My 4.5 star read this month was You Had Me at Hola by Alexis Daria. This is about an actress who has just landed the lead role on a telenovela that is being brought to the US market. It's a bilingual telenovela, so although it's primarily in English, there will be Spanish in there as well, which means that our main character has to brush up on her Spanish because although she sort of speaks some of it, she could use some help. At the last minute, it also turns out that her intended co-star can't do the show anymore, so somebody else is cast as her co-star, and that ends up being this guy that all of her sisters, and especially her grandmother, loves from telenovelas. To try to be the best grandchild at her grandmother's 80th birthday, she does have a plan to ask him to attend the party. When it comes to his side of the story, he's played the leading man in many a thing. He's been kind of a bunch of different characters, but what the world doesn't know about him is he actually has a secret son living in Puerto Rico. He and a previous co-star had a very short affair. She ended up getting pregnant, passed off the child to him, and he doesn't let people know about the child because he's very scared that somebody is going to do something to the child. This stems from an incident when the child was a baby and somebody actually broke into his house. What I really appreciated about this book is we got to see the behind the scenes of taping of all of the episodes for this show. It was being made for a streaming service, so think Netflix, but it wasn't Netflix. And the production crew on this show was fantastic because they employed an intimacy coordinator. It's the job of this person not only to make sure that the actors are comfortable with each other, but to choreograph the more intimate scenes. This is something that I honestly hope is being prioritized in more and more TV shows as well as live theater, because let me tell you, I've had to kiss some people in theater before, and there wasn't really all that much discussion of is this okay, and choreographing to make sure that not only is the scene as good as it could be, but that the people in it are comfortable. This was a fantastic romance, and I would gladly read anything else by this author. No, I can never do my monthly wrap-ups on one battery charge alone. One moment while I switch you over. On to my 5-star reads, the first one being The Faceless Little Woman Who Secretly Lives Near Home by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. This is the third Welcome to Night Vale novel and is the origin story of the faceless little woman who secretly lives near home. This is a reread for me. I actually got an ARC through the library last year and absolutely loved it, and then when I was filming my best and worst of video for 2020, I was reminded of this book, and I was reminded of the fact that the audiobook was probably now available at the library, and it was, and I really wanted to listen to it because the faceless little woman who secretly lives near home is voice acted by Mara Wilson. I'm going to be completely honest and say that I haven't listened to an episode of Welcome to Night Vale for years, because once I realized I could be listening to books for free from the library, I stopped listening to podcasts. However, Welcome to Night Vale was the very first podcast that I fell in love with, and I remember always really loving the episodes that happen to have this super weird character in them, so I was excited to see what her backstory is. It is a very long backstory. She is a very old woman, and I very much appreciated listening to this story the second time around. My next book is The Skin We're In, A Year of Black Resistance and Power by Desmond Cole. This takes a year out of recent history, I believe it was 2017, and talks about racist things that happened in Canada, because yeah, Canada, we're super racist. People like to compare us to our neighbor to the south and say that we are less racist than they are. No, we also have super racist systemic issues. It's just a fact. Cole is both a journalist and an activist, and I really enjoyed seeing those two things married into this essay collection. It does go month by month and talk about major things that happened, not only specifically in that month, but also giving you historical context, as well as how the case had ended up if it had a concluding point at the point of publication. If you're Canadian and you think that everything is just fine when it comes to racism in Canada, please read this book. The penultimate book on this list is Anna on the Edge by A.J. Sass. This is a middle grade book about a character named Anna who is a figure skater and trying to figure out what their gender is. Her coach ends up moving to a different rink, which means that she ends up moving to a different rink, and there she meets somebody in skate school who she knows used to use different pronouns than he currently does. Anna makes friends with this boy one day, and because Anna's wearing the wrong name tag, he assumes that she is a boy, and she doesn't correct him. What follows is Anna questioning her gender, especially as it pertains to figure skating, because she has a new choreographer that's making her wear a skirt, and that doesn't feel good. She doesn't like when people call her her full name, she doesn't like being called Miss or Madam or anything like that, and she's not completely opposed to being called a boy, but that also doesn't fit. However, she doesn't really know how to bring this up with people in her life, so this is the story of that. Obviously, this is near the end of the list, so I absolutely loved it. I very much enjoyed it, and I think that you should check it out if anything I said sounds at least remotely interesting to you. There's a lot of talk of figure skating in here. I don't know my figure skating moves whatsoever, but I could still picture this character just twisting and turning and flying around the rink, and I just very much enjoyed that. My favorite book this month was A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. This is another book of essays, and I didn't start out the month intending to read so many of them, but I very much enjoyed this. This essay collection is part memoir because all of these essays have to do with her personal experience of being Indigenous and growing up in a very difficult family life, as well as mental health issues, both her own and her mother. There's also an essay that has to do with anti-fat bias. This collection is a lot, but it's a lot in a way that feels really good. When I finished listening to it, I immediately started listening to it again. I'm going to listen to more bits here and there until the book auto returns to the library. And I enjoyed this collection so much that I actually put it on my wish list because I'm going to want my own copy to go back to time and time again. Again, particularly if you're Canadian and want to know about Indigenous issues in your own country, this is a great book to pick up, but it's that and so much more. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these or any of these sound good to you, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you're on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that is down below, as well as a link to my PayPal and my Amazon wishlist because it's my birthday coming up. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!